All right. Well, thank you for the patience. We have some tech issues on Coach's side. Camera's not working for some reason, but we're going to push through anyways because that's what we do.
So,
Uh, but I want to thank everybody for coming into day 2 of the SpeakHER Series. I'm thrilled to be joined by Coach Leanna Osei of StFX and the X-Women. Coach, I want to thank you for taking your time out of your day to do this, to shed some light on your career as a player, coach, kind of your journey to where you are today. Just before we jump in, it will be recorded to put online later for those who weren't able to make it that can listen in afterwards. If you have any questions, we'll use the chat function at the bottom, so just submit those as you see fit, and we'll work them in kind of as we go. And other than that, kind of keep it light, informal. You get to look at my face for 50 minutes. I apologize for that, but nevertheless, let's jump right in. So, Coach, if you don't mind, let's kind of start with your kind of playing career. If you can kind of take us through that a little bit. I know you had some stops in the States as well as Canada. So if you don't mind, we'll start with that and see where we end up.
sure. So thanks for having me, Tyler. I really appreciate this, and I appreciate everybody listening in as well. So my playing days, I really started taking basketball seriously, as far back as I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
My first instance of kind of organized ball, I had some older girls that kind of lived in my community.
Mm-hmm.
And they had asked me, hey, do you play club ball? Do you play OBA? And I had no idea what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
And so before I knew it, I hopped on a bus from Jane and Finch to Jane and Falstaff. And I was at Falstaff Community Center. And that's where I met Coach Roe Russell,
Mm-hmm.
who actually is kind of one of my father figures now.
Mm-hmm.
And I played club ball and I played AAU. And I was fortunate enough to kind of have a number of opportunities. At the
Mm-hmm.
high school level, I went to Eastern Commerce
Mm-hmm.
through my sophomore to my 5th year.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a great experience because it was the first time that I'd ever been in what I would consider like my first instance of like a high performance environment. We had I had teammates who played on our junior national team, and it was an unreal atmosphere. Our men's side was pretty popular as well. Roy Rana was on the men's side, Trevor
Mm-hmm.
Bullen, and a few other people. A couple guys that are playing pro right now, but on our women's side, it was just it was empowering. We had a great coach, Kareem Griffin,
Mm-hmm.
who led us to kind of consecutive city championships, and we went to OFSA. And we were kind of like that one inner city team that got invited to the out of town tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us, it was always a big deal because you couldn't just be anybody. You had to be really good.
Yep.
And so we kind of would get out to the Hamiltons and the Ottawas, and it really was, for many of us, the first time we left kind of the city
Mm-hmm.
at all. And so after Eastern and playing some AU ball with local teams and with a New York-based team, I was fortunate enough to have a few scholarship opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And when I had an opportunity to go somewhere hot and not see any snow, I jumped at it. And so I decided to go to the University of Miami in
Mm-hmm.
Florida, and I had a really good relationship with the assistant coach. And I had an amazing experience there. Honestly, it was something out of a postcard. Everybody was beautiful. Weather was awesome. We got food here. We had stipends and the whole nine. But unfortunately, I needed surgery my first year.
Okay.
And that was kind of one of my major factors that kind of kept me out from playing.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we progressed through our preseason play, we actually had a few kids who weren't eligible. So I was coming back from injury or from surgery rather on both my legs and learning how to walk and run and do that whole nine. And basically I was called on to play.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't comfortable with it. My mentor, my coach wasn't comfortable with it, but it was almost like I was given no choice. And so that kind of was like, it was probably like a light bulb moment for me, like, holy smokes, like these guys don't really care about me. And so I started developing some like back pains because my legs weren't ready. And the therapist was like, I don't really know what to tell you. Mm-hmm. And then there were other nuances, I guess, involved in just being a Canadian and being in that different kind of culture. Yep. So, there's the jokes and stuff and, people calling you Canada and, like I had amazing teammates. I played with McDonald's All-Americans, a few players who are still having great careers now.
Mm-hmm.
So with the players, it was cool, but there was so much that I didn't know. Like one example is I remember I was speaking with my family members, and I wanted to apply for a student loan. Like, OSAP is kind of like the main thing that people apply for.
Yep.
So I'm on full scholarship, but I need a student loan because you get your stuff taken care of to an extent, but then you don't really have anything. And I remember going back and forth with OSAP, and they're like, hey, you get too much money for your scholarship. And I'm like, what?
Oh.
I'm like, so you're telling me I can't apply for money that I got to pay? So anyways, there was all this kind of like just little nuances stuff that you don't really think about, right?
Right.
Not having a bank account, right? Being a Canadian. So having to kind of find my way to like one-off Western Unions and money transfers, not being able to work or do something to get a little bit of cash because you don't have a social security number. So there was a lot kind of going on there. I went to a private school, so unbeknownst to me in the recruiting process, I actually had a fee I had to pay on my scholarship that all international students had to pay. So just things that, like, where is this coming from? And so it just, I think a lot of it was honestly, it was kind of the injury stuff and me feeling like I was more, they valued me more for what I could do on the floor than as a person than my academic rigor. I remember going back and forth with my coaching staff because they had wanted me to take one less course, and I was like, I'm doing great now. Why would I take one less course? So it was just things I didn't expect. I expected it to be tough. I expected it to be new. I expected it to be a challenge, but I didn't expect that I was really just going to be valued for my athletic ability. And so I made the very tough decision to kind of transfer. And I had talked to, some friends and some mentors and stuff. And, some people are like, stick it out and that whole nine. But for me, I just, I felt comfortable kind of making that move. And for me, the leadership was important. And I just didn't have that sense of trust with my coaching staff. So that's kind of what led to that. So instead of going to another school and sitting out, I actually had some teammates of mine that didn't qualify to go D1, and they actually went to junior college.
Okay.
And it just so happened that they were at one of the top junior colleges that also happened to be the school that literally one of my basketball idols graduated from. So I started talking to them, and so the school is called Trinity Valley Community College.
Yep.
And there's this woman, Shannon Bobbitt, who used to play in the WNBA, and she graduated from there. So when I kind of name dropped her, and I was like, man, like I really love Shannon, and she went to Tennessee and played with Candace, and so she called me and she pitched me, and so I went from like palm trees and like lizards and snakes, really good food, and then I ended up in this like middle of nowhere, not even on a map town called Athens, Texas. We're talking like one movie theater, nothing walking distance.
It's a big change from
it was
Miami.
We went from good living, good food to like we were struggling, but
good luck finding us on a map.
Good luck finding us on a map. I remember my teammates and I, when we wanted to go out, when we had time, we would pitch in like $15 and we take like a $200 cab to go to Dallas and party. And then come back. Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy. We had to pitch in for stuff. So I ended up being at TVCC, and we had a good 1 year, and I was with two of my former teammates. It was an amazing experience. We played for great coaches. And then I actually verbally committed to a school called Robert Morris University, which is kind of in the Pittsburgh area.
Yep.
And then I had some health issues going on back home with my brother specifically, but just with my mother and stuff. And so I made the call late in the spring to head back home. So got home this would be 2011, and I was out of school, and I kind of made a deal with my mom that I was supposed to help out with some of the health related stuff, and then also work, because we were really in need. So I made a deal to take that year off of school and work. And so I did some really, really sketchy, like overnight work, like some crazy, like like 10 p.m. to like 7 a.m. shifts. And
Yeah.
and I did is I spent my weekends reaching out and doing things in the basketball community. So like,
Okay.
that summer I was like, I wrote for North Pole Hoops with Tariq and Elias when they first got started.
Yep.
I reached out to Ontario Basketball and I started doing some TIDP stuff. I started working with the Jewel League of Ontario, and I started their social medias, like the play-by-plays and the scores. And then I found myself like probably within half a year at this position where it's like, man, okay, there's a real market for this. And so what we didn't have is we didn't have many scouting services. Like we kind of had a couple, but there was nothing that really covered. And so I had a lot of coaches saying, hey, can you hook me up with this kid? What's the information here? And then I had a lot of parents like, how do we get to, how do we make these contacts? Like, what's the process? And so in the fall, I started an organization called Can Lead Sports. And so I had just a few friends and colleagues on board, my former coach, and our mission was to just kind of develop and run showcase events that would promote young women specifically, because the guys were getting a lot of attention and the girls weren't. And so we would cover like the most prominent high school tournaments, and we did the Jewel League, and then we went to OFSA, and everybody was so supportive. I remember OFSA being in like Windsor, and they come to like my hotel and just to cover it. And so it was like a really great time, and so it was really great on a basketball standpoint, but at home it was very, very challenging. My eldest brother, who was 2 years older than me, and he graduated from Laurier University, never played sports, really smart guy.
Okay.
But he was having a lot of recurring kind of mental health complications. And I mean, I think there's a lot that might have got into it, but he didn't have any mentors. He really, there wasn't many people that looked like him. He really struggled with that. And when he got into the workforce, it was even more challenging. And so unfortunately, by the end of that summer, he actually took his own life. Oh. And so it was like a shocker for our family. My mother had taken a bunch of loans out and credit cards out to help finance his education.
Okay.
And we always had a lot of faith in him. He graduated in like the top 5 percentile of CAA exams. So he was pretty smart. But then our world was kind of turned upside down when that happened, and so we quickly found ourselves homeless, and we had to split up as a family. And while he was going through that process, he actually helped me register for a few Canadian schools. And I was very ignorant. I was very ignorant as to like what happened at the Canadian level. Like I always thought it cost like $100,000 to go to school in Canada, so it just never was something that I considered. And that was one area that he really wanted me to get back to school. When on his good days, he really pushed that. And when that happened, I had talked to our church pastor, and I was like, you know what? Like, I can't go back to school. Like, I got to make sure mom's okay. And my mom just grabbed me, and my mom was like, no, like, you have to go. You got to go to Laurier. Like, you got to do it. And so I think the turning point for me was Coach Falco at Laurier. He was talking off and on with me, and he was really hoping I'd join the roster, and they had another Division I transfer. But I was like, I got to work part-time. I got to focus on my academics. And what really did it for me is, I had yet to meet the team. And when my brother had passed, there was a contingent of Laurier people that had come down to our traditional funeral. Oh, wow. And the whole team came with the coaching staff. And they didn't, and like 99% of those people had no idea who I was. And so it was very emotional. And that's when I knew. I was like, man, like I'm going to go to Laurier. I'm going to play. And the next 3 years were amazing at Laurier. It was like I say it all the time, it was the best decision I made. Coach Falco was a great supporter, as was our athletics director. I had a great academic career as well. And so I think 2 out of 3 years we were there. We were like top 5 in the country. And then we went to nationals, I think my second year. And so playing at the U Sport level was great. And it's crazy because, 5 years before that, I would have envisioned myself being at a completely different situation. And so since then I've stayed connected to the grassroots level and just kind of given back. And I've been fortunate enough to kind of coach on the men's and women's side, like a lot at the grassroots level and at the semi level. And I guess that's that. I mean, that was my playing career. So it was just, it was a little bit of a whirlwind, but I think from my experiences, it's allowed me to share my perspectives on a few things. And I think just with a lot of the leadership around me, I help with a lot of skill development stuff and talent ID and recruitment consulting. Some of that stuff I still kind of do, and I'm passionate about it. But it just feels like a movie sometimes. But I always knew sport would be something that I really value, and I love it. And I don't love it just for the fact that, I was blessed enough to be talented. I love it for everything else, right? I love it for the relationships. I love it for the sisterhood. I love it for, the fact that it's dually tied to kind of educational pursuits. And so right now I'm like living a dream, coaching has taken me different places, but I really can't ask for much else right now.
It's interesting to look back at your time at Miami when they just valued you as an athlete, and then you go to Laurier, and before you even make the decision, the entire team comes to the funeral.
Yeah.
And it's the exact opposite, where they value you as the person you are without even having met you before. If that doesn't show, everyone knows there's a big, I guess, difference in NCAA versus U Sports, but I think that right there, just showing that they valued you as a person and hadn't even met you yet, speaks bounds of what it's all about up here.
Absolutely. And even in my job now as a coach, it's like, like winning is important, competing is important, but it's really about developing that whole student athlete and seeing them through, making sure they're supported, making sure that, they have that platform that they can use and they have somebody to talk to. And that's one thing I love about our level. I was approached by a few different people that are like, hey, you want to pursue coaching down south? And I was like, not really. I love being able to work at the grassroots level. Obviously, you've got a million roles in the NCAA, and I said, like, if I'm going to coach in college, like this is the spot to be, because why not help grow our product? Why not help our kids, right?
Yep. I'm going to try one thing to see if your video will work. I've got a thing on mine that says ask you to start your video. I'm going to see if that does it first. And if not, then we're just going to roll with it as it is.
I just clicked it.
I don't think it's good.
Yeah, the weird thing is it actually says my video's on.
It says it on mine too. That's okay. We'll keep rolling. If it shows up, it shows up. If it doesn't, oh well. When you, in your role now, when you're kind of at recruiting people and whatnot, and you run into someone that's driven to go NCAA and they're not really considering Canadian, how do you kind of, without kind of persuading them too much, how do you help them open their eyes to what Canadian colleges and universities have to offer? Because you find often that there's some players that it's NCAA or nothing. How do you kind of get them to open their eyes to be like, there's a ton of great options to stay home as well?
Well, I think for me, being a little bit more entrenched into the basketball community gives me a little bit of leverage, and in terms of like I'm a familiar face. They kind of respect what I have to say because they know I've been through it. And so when I give a lot of kids advice or families advice, it's usually within the context of me training a kid or doing some sort of evaluation. And then I'm like, look, the reality is, if you want to get to this level, these are the things that you're going to need to improve on, or this is what you're going to need to do. And so it's more been in that kind of scenario. But honestly, just sharing my story, I think, is really insightful for them. I asked them about, not many kids know what they want to do afterwards, but I asked them, I say, unless you want to go directly into coaching, you have to understand that there's a lot of barriers there. Like as soon as you're done school, you're gonna have to come back, and then what? You know, like how does that tie into it? I asked about what's on the table currently, because there's a lot of disillusioned athletes. Like your fifth year and you haven't had a single offer. And I'm not saying things can't happen last minute. I know a few people who've had success stories, but the reality is, don't turn down coaches that are willing to look out for you, to kind of take a shot in the dark in the middle of nowhere. I guess the other thing I've done is I've been able to get supporting voices, and it's not like I'm saying go here and don't go here.
Right.
I'm saying listen to more people that can share perspectives. It doesn't mean you're going to have the same experiences, but if anything, it just gets your feelers out. And so I think if you kind of give them that, then they can weigh their options a little bit better, and it has them thinking about things. Because often what we find is with our prospective athletes, they want to go D1 because their friends want to go D1 because they think that's the cool thing to do. They don't understand how difficult it is. If you're somebody that comes from a big family and you want your family around you, you got to understand, if you're talking about going 100,000 miles away, they're not going to be around you. And guess what? It's not a short flight,
No.
And so I pick their brain a bit, and I ask why a lot. And I mean, even as a coach, I get my kids to ask me why a lot. I want them to question things. But and then you kind of have kids who are really good and they gotta go. And so there's a few coaches, some BCS coaches that will hit me up. Hey, coach, who's next? And I don't mind sharing some names. Listen, this kid is gonna be a problem. Because there's kids that like they're gonna go. Like you look at like an Aaliyah Edwards, like she's gonna go, and Russell. But there's a lot of kids that compete at our level and do a great job, and more so there's kids returning now, and I don't know what the statistics are, but annually we have a number of kids coming back. And I look at Sam Keltos at Brock, man, like the kid came back and double machine, and she's gonna have, she wants to play some pro, she's gonna have a crazy profile, kind of take and move on with. So I think that's been part of growing the product at the U Sport level. When I was coming up, like I didn't see highlights on girls basketball, and I didn't really know the coaches. I think with the exception of Chantal Valet, because Windsor was like a powerhouse. I had no idea who was doing what where. Like it just wasn't a thing. And now it's like the product is, we're here. You know what I mean? Like teams are competing. I think earlier this year, I'm pretty sure Ryerson went and played Buffalo. Buffalo had a great run at the NCAA tournament the last couple of seasons, and they almost beat them. They might have lost by like 2 points. On the men's side, for years now, our guys have been competing. Our Carltons, our Ryersons, and so forth. So we're here. When I talk to my American colleagues, I'm like, look, like we have some teams, not my team because we're rebuilding, but we got some teams like, you could, we're like a low D1. We got teams that are like mid majors out here. So you can't sleep on us. You know what I mean? So I think U Sports is coming. I think again, the retention and getting kids to play, we got to figure out a way with the funding to kind of get around that, because you look at the college level, there's a lot of diversity. At the U Sport level, there isn't. There's so many economic barriers there, right? For a lot of diverse individuals. So, we got to find a way to make investments and so that we can get those kind of kids in these situations. And ultimately, it's about their education. And we know getting that education really opens up doors when you have that degree. And it's a lifeline for some families. It's a life changer. For my family, it's a life changer. So I think that's something that if we can find a way to invest on that kind of level, I think we would have more athletes playing. I know a ton of kids that would love to play U Sport if they felt they could afford it. And so sometimes it's tough to have that conversation to say, hey, I'd love for you to come to StFX, but you're gonna have to come up with $15K versus hey, you pay nothing and you get this experience, and who knows, maybe something comes out of it. That you always come back. You can always come back, right? So it's I try not to minimize those real barriers to post-secondary pursuits,
Hmm.
but it's there, right? And I think if we start growing that and some assistance there, I think it's a lot easier. Some schools have done a good job of finding ways to supplement
Hmm.
income, for kids,
Yep.
getting them, RA positions and all that kind of stuff. But
Hmm.
I personally, I'm a young coach. I've only been coaching for 2 seasons, but
Hmm.
it's been a challenge. And I've only been doing this for 2 seasons. So I see some U Sport coaches on here, Cheryl, Robin, like, like it's, I don't know about your challenges, but it's very challenging trying to get a talented kid to come because of that barrier.
And I find too with a lot of the players that do end up going south of the border, we talked about it with Robin yesterday and kind of women in coaching and especially the CCAA with the numbers being so low, the coverage isn't really there
Mm-hmm.
on U Sports basketball until nationals,
Mm.
and then it dies off, and then it's a dry spell until October, and then again, it's really nothing until nationals. So people don't really see it that often. So then they don't really, I don't think they really consider it as a viable option. And then add in those other barriers, like you said, financials and whatever else. It
Mm-hmm.
may take them a year or two to go south of the border to realize, okay, this isn't for me. Let's go back home and find a way. But I think a lot of it is too, they don't see it. They don't really know anything about it. And the
Mm-hmm.
conversation's it's only 3 weeks out of the year. I don't know how you expect to keep more talent at home when
Right.
nobody's talking about it.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think at the ground level, like one of the things I found being out here on the East Coast is like for so long because of these smaller communities. I mean, there's so many talented kids that are Division One caliber, but they choose to play because they grew up and they were able to actually go to games and they were able to meet players and go to
Mm-hmm.
camp. And like back in Ontario where I grew up, you just don't have that same connection. Now, one would argue and say, hey, it's on the coaches, they don't get out to enough events, but then like personally, like again, if the visibility is not there, coaches have to do their part. I
Mm-hmm.
would agree there. Like we need to be more visible, but at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, like I can't recruit young women who look like me if I don't get this job.
Mm-hmm.
So, it says something if in less than 2 years we have the most diverse team on this side of the country.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying? So I think it's both ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think coaches need to do a better job of getting involved in their communities. But then the other part of it is like, I mean, who, coming up as a player, my understanding was a lot of coaches only recruited a lot of kinds of players,
Mm-hmm.
like a specific kind of player.
Yep.
And that's a whole another conversation, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of it as well. And
Mm-hmm.
then once you get in kids, like where's the support,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I've, some of my student athletes have challenges right now, and they're trying to make a better life for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and sport, thank goodness for sport because it's what's keeping them going.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a difficult one for sure to answer. Is how do we keep relevancy, right? And how do we get that going? And
Mm-hmm.
fortunately for like organizations like yourself and aspiring videographers, and there's not a lot in our sport industry, right? Like and if there is, we don't know about it because where do
Yeah,
we go to get it?
that's
And
true.
but I think our game is fortunate for people who have been able to shed light and contribute to it for so long. Martin Timmerman,
Yeah.
um, again, different media outlets that are coming in and saying, "Whoa, okay, this girl is nice."
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just stand still white girl basketball. This is like these girls are getting after it. They're Paige Beckers. They're I mean,
Yep.
and so I think that's pretty cool because we
Mm-hmm.
have some real ballers getting after it now, and the product is growing. Girls are getting excited,
Mm-hmm.
so it makes me happy to see the growth of the game that way.
Yeah, and we talked about it yesterday again with Robin too. And growing the women's game, a lot of people see the men's game first, and that's kind of where the conversation stops. There's not as much attention paid to the women's game in Canada as there is the men's.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once you get into a game and watch it, you realize, like you said, it's not just that standstill white girl basketball. They can hoop, they can play.
Trust
It's
me.
fun to watch. It's exciting.
Yeah.
And once you get in once and see it,
Yeah.
you're hooked. You'll come back again. It's
Right.
just you need to get past your own mental barrier of it's women's basketball. Why would I go? No, go. Do it. Trust me.
Mm-hmm.
And we be nice to see more outlets cover women's
Yeah.
in Canada. There's significantly more that cover men's only. It'd be nice to get a better representation of the women's game coast to coast, because I think the BioSteel game that started 2 years ago for women was a huge step.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish it would have started when BioSteel started itself, had both at the same time and
Right.
not come in 3 years later. But that's a big step to get them on in that spotlight where they deserve to be, on the same stage. And it'd be nice to see more appreciation and attention showed.
Mm-hmm.
I could go on that for hours too, but that's
Mm-hmm.
another time.
Yeah.
Looking at your coaching career, you've had stops at the Rise Center, 2 years now at StFX.
Mm-hmm.
What was it that first got you into coaching? Like, when did you realize that, okay, I want to be a coach?
I think it was going back to when I was 12, and I met kind of like some of my club coaches,
Mm-hmm.
and I saw like not only the message they were pushing, which was like faith, hard work and in your academic diligence,
Mm-hmm.
and basketball. And it was like, man, like that was something that just rang true to me. So
Mm-hmm.
I was fortunate enough to actually start coaching when I was at Eastern. I was a senior and I was coaching our junior boys team.
Okay.
And I mean, it was amazing. Like, and all I ever did was like give compliments to the guys, and they loved it because, many of them just, they love the game, but like, a little awkward. And,
Yep. Yep.
lots of positive feedback.
Yep.
And then we go on and we would compete. And I was like, man, especially when we would win. But I mean, even when we didn't win, it was just that, it was that kind of like, man, like being able to infuel positivity into another person. Like that was huge. Like I'd never seen myself doing that before. So I knew, even as I was playing, I always knew I wanted to be a coach. And so it was just a matter of like, what kind of coach, like
Mm-hmm.
how am I going to get there? What's the plan? But many of the most important mentors that I've had have kind of been connected to me and through coaching, and whether they coach now, at some point they did. And so that's kind of when I knew. When I came back to Ontario and I kind of just put the feelers out, and I was like, anybody, use me. I want to help build basketball in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I was able to do is kind of get involved with our provincial team.
Right.
So Krista, Jukin at UIT, just kind of brought me in to help out on the girls' side. And
Mm-hmm.
then before I knew it, I was helping her coach. And then that was an amazing experience because it was like the same AU events that, I had played at. Now I'm
Okay.
kind of advise these, young women, listen, this ain't no game. You got to be ready to go, like this girl plays
Yeah.
EYBL and, like, so
Mm-hmm.
it was sick because we were able to kind of like, it was like full circle, but like really quickly, like I still felt like I wanted to get on the court and be a younger coach. Like I still feel like that. Like I get on the court probably once or twice a week with my girls, and I'll trash talk them and just, try to get a little bit out of them. But
you got to show them. You got to show them you can still play.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, they laugh at me and stuff and block my shot and stuff. But, I let them know Coach Lee still has it, but I love that. I love that. It's like I have a little sister and,
Mm-hmm.
she never really played sports. And so a lot of the young women I work with, I call them my young girls because when I was always the youngest playing with some of the older girls and they used to call me young girl. So
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of the kids I recruit, hey, what's up, young girl? How you doing, young girl? And I'll just give them some advice.
Yep.
And then, hi, Coach Lee, how are you? So, but I really like it. And I love empowering our young women, right? I'm always talking to them about, like, listen, I said, you're talking too light. You got to put a little bit more bass in your voice. You got to, okay, how are you dealing with this? Okay. So I encourage them to talk to me about things more than just basketball. Not because I have all the answers, because I don't, but maybe I can help. Maybe I can direct you somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But that, the confidence bit, I think, is huge.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I really encourage the girls to just kind of, get out of their comfort zones and just, yell, beat your chest, like do whatever you need to do to just be more free and
Yep.
not feel like you're constantly being judged and stuff. So all those reasons are why I love coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I really look up to a lot of the coaches who've been doing this for so long, because I think it's amazing going through a cycle with
Mm-hmm.
kids you coach and then seeing them walk the stage.
Yep.
Like that, like that's incredible. Just this past year, the first kid I met when I took this job, she's now a GA with us, but she finished, she finished her fifth year, and I couldn't hold back my emotions, and I'm like, yo, like I'm so proud of you, you know what I mean? I'm
Mm-hmm.
so proud of you. But I would really love to see the young women that I recruited in my first class walk the stage. I think that would be that's definitely
Mm-hmm.
something that I would love to see.
What was the best piece of advice that you've been given, whether it was a player, as a coach, that you still hang on to today and try to pass on to your kids on the team?
Hmm. What's the best piece of advice?
Or the worst piece of advice that you refuse to live by and you do the exact opposite?
Um, I think one thing that I've heard a lot, like in trying to do a lot of stuff for the community, I
Mm-hmm.
usually have a few people that are just like, oh, you won't make any money doing that. Like it's not worth it. And I, like I don't come for money.
Mm-hmm.
I still don't have much money, but I just feel like life is so much more than that,
Right. Mm-hmm.
Um, does it hurt to see my mom working a factory job every day overnight? Yes. And
Mm-hmm.
so like my personal mission is to, hopefully help her retire sooner than later.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's never come down to the bottom dollar. I'm, like my, without the assistance of my father figure, it's one of my coaches,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where I would be if it came down to that bottom dollar. I would have just been left in the wind. God knows if I would even be here now if
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have my high school coach take me in and, and live downtown so that I could live with his mother because I had nowhere to live.
Mm-hmm.
If he was worried about the bottom dollar, I wouldn't have been able to graduate high school,
Mm-hmm.
So I can't now turn around and be like, well, I got to make money, so forget these kids or forget these people. And so I'm always like, whenever I hear that, I mean, I understand it, but I just, it's never really come down to the bottom dollar. So I think, if you could make some money, great.
Yeah.
But I think it's more about the impact that you have. And at our level here in Canada, our sport industry is so small, right? We've got 48 full-time coaching positions,
Yep.
maybe a couple of full-time assistant positions, and then everybody else is at the grassroots level.
Mm-hmm.
And they're overworked, they're underpaid, and they do it for their passion. So it's not a big market as is,
No.
especially in racialized communities. People don't have money. So, I don't mind training kids back to back to back to back, knowing they can't afford it. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not gonna say no because they can't get $30 together or $50 together or whatever the case is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's amazing people at our grassroots level that just they provide so much time and efforts and just I could go on and on.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm fortunate enough where I'm one of a few people that can actually do this for a living, and so
Mm-hmm.
I don't take that for granted. But I'm definitely not going to close the door on somebody or on an opportunity because it's not a moneymaker. I just think I think that's more of a Canadian thing than it is. I think if it's not the Raptors, it's not NHL. I mean, they're
Right.
not making a lot of money. So
That's true. On that kind of grassroots, I want to shed some more light on CanLeets and the Black Canadian Coaches Association before we get into any Instagram questions that came in, because I want to give that some light as well. So you've already touched on CanLeets a fair bit. Talk about the Black Canadian Coaches Association that you guys started up in June. I'll let you kind of explain that
yeah.
and go as you wish.
Since I've been so as a player and then now being a coach at the Canadian level, I find I'm in this kind of weird spot where I'm tied to the grassroots community, and then I'm also like a university educator, and then I'm also a full-time coach.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that there's a lot of voids and there's a lot of kind of channels that they're not really being bridged. And so for one, I figure like we need an ability to advocate and support one another as minorities in sport. I think there's a need for that. I mean, one could argue there's a need for coaches in general, but I went through a situation last year where there was some racial undertones in some things that have happened. I have a few colleagues and friends that have went through things, and I just, it's so challenging when you're the only one or you're one of a very few. And so I just feel like from a coaching standpoint, we can support each other better than that, especially considering that when you look at Black Canadians specifically, I mean, like sport has always been very important to our identity. Not that we're all just athletes, but it's been an important part of cohesiveness and unity and cultural continuity and stuff like that. And so that was kind of one of the things I was looking at. The other was being able to shed light on the contributions and the accomplishments of individuals in our Canadian sport community. So when I started the BCCA, I really just had coaches in mind. Like, how can we have a network? How can we support one another? How can we talk? But then I thought about it and I was like, man, like I did a master's of arts in history and I love doing research. And, what's out there is, a lot of the historiography just speaks to individual athlete accomplishments. And even that, Donovan Bailey would tell you, even that's not there, even the celebration of that. And so to be quite honest with you, I wanted the BCCA to roll out like in the fall. I wanted to get some influencers kind of behind it, like your Roy Ranas, maybe your Pinball Clemens, like people like that. But it's just with all the recent events, and then being at home, having a lot more time on my hands than I'm used to.
Yeah.
So when I'm not looking at film or doing some meetings with my team, it kind of gave me something to do. So I've been working on it since September, kind of off and on.
Okay.
And it kind of started with just coaches, and then I was like, well, our athletes need a lot of advocacy. And just in my own scenario and talking to coaches, we have a lot of young Black women, young Black men that have these challenges. So what's interesting for me in some of my research is being out here on the East Coast, a lot of people don't realize like African Nova Scotians will get a lot of support because they're considered indigenous, right? Because they've been here for a very long time. And even that, I mean, that's largely been confined to like gifts from families who are African Nova Scotians themselves.
Okay.
And so when you look at the BIPOC community, there's a number of supports for indigenous groups. There's some support for our African Nova Scotian groups, but then if you're African Canadian or you're Caribbean or you're kind of anything in between, there really isn't anything. And so that's one area that I was looking at. I said, well, there needs to be something there for students. And so my hope is with the BCCA is we are really championing, like, making this a little bit of an easier transition for kids coming in. And then the other part of it is just the allyship, right? Like the supporters and people that are well-intentioned, but may not realize some of the systemic issues that we kind of have to go through day by day, year by year. The past 2 years, it's been challenging for me to kind of get anything in terms of, even Black Heritage Month, trying to get something going. Like this year, I had asked if we were doing a Black Heritage Month, and it's something I brought up kind of the spring before. And, we had a game starting in like an hour and a half. And instead of being in the locker room, I'm like driving to the local school to bring in, our African drumming sets and to carpool kids from our local African Nova Scotian community to present, and to perform. And so like, there's just, there's a lot of challenges there. And I think being a Black woman at StFX and kind of like the only female in the department and kind of the only Black coach in the Maritimes, like a lot of people look up to me to support. And so I feel a duty and responsibility to support. But then I also kind of get the ear of students who are really, really struggling, and there just isn't a lot of supports there for them. So big picture with the BCCA, I see it as sort of like an umbrella where it's about empowerment. We can put out some feature stories and shed lights on our coaches doing amazing things. And then the other part of it is establishing that network and supporting one another. And so it's not just coaches, but like individuals in the sport community. So we have a number of community coaches, small business owners, formally and informally, whether it's in media marketing, whether it's in skill development, whether it's in wellness, and they're constantly looking for to offer their services or to or really just to network. And so I think there's just a void there. And so if we have a platform, something tangible, somewhere where we can put bios if you want to go and learn about the stories of these people, somewhere where you can go and access a network. As an ally, it's not, you don't just need to be Black, but, as an ally, as a supporter, that, listen, it's just something taken up by coaches to really uplift our community. So at the very least, if we can celebrate ourselves, that's great, and in the long term, if we can, I would love to get it to a point where it's like a not-for-profit and we can actually secure some bigger grants that can help student athletes, that can help small business owners, black business owners in the sport industry. That's kind of the long-term vision, but the short-term, definitely just a network. If I have a kid and I'm a coach and I want to be able to connect with other coaches, there should be a platform for that.
Yep. So, yeah, and I think like you said, it's kind of started with coaches, and then as you kind of started thinking about, like, it can have an endless reach. It can go anywhere beyond sport, and if it stays in sport, any sport you can imagine can.
Well, I was thinking, like, we're so connected in basketball, and there's obviously an overrepresentation of Black people in performing in the sport and coaching in the sport, and which makes sense. Basketball is we see it as Black culture, like it's always been there. And so it kind of has me thinking, like, man, if we don't get support, and we're in arguably the most, it's the second most popular sport. Some call it the golden age of basketball right now in Canada. So what about everybody in soccer? What about hockey? What about these kinds of things? And so I find that's important as well, is how can we create a network for people who are not involved in the prominent sport, and increase that network capability, right, in terms of offering services, gaining mentorship opportunities, and so forth.
Yeah. And even the smaller sports too, like throw tennis, golf, anything like that nowhere near the mainstream coverage, they can benefit from the support as well, because there's going to be a lot of mentors out there that they may not see in their sport, but can utilize from other areas to help with whatever they have going on.
With the BCCA, one of the things I did early on was I reached out to some academia at the university level specifically, who specialize in race-based data. And what I found is, we talk figuratively about changing the narrative, but we have to kind of start asking ourselves why that narrative isn't there. And it's because there isn't a lot of race-based data. Like, our academia don't know where to get that information. They don't have the connections. And it's very, very difficult. So we have so many sports sociologists and sport historians across the country, but they don't actually know who to go to or what to do. And in some cases, like I know there's a professor at U of T that actually went to U Sports consecutively and said, hey, I'd love to take race-based data. I think it could really give us an idea as to what's going on at the ground level, and just, and that not kind of happening. And so I think if we can use the BCCA as a hub to say, hey, listen, if there's something we can collect here from a race-based data standpoint, like that's important. Now we're talking about, getting things published and resources. So, I mean, that would be assuming that we get some people to buy into the BCCA, but that would be really cool. And again, like I'm a little bit of a historian nerd myself, so I look out there and there's just not a lot. And our Canadian identity through sport is so much more different than our American counterparts. And I think there's something to be said there, whether you're looking at coaches, whether you're looking at student athletes at our level, whether you're looking at the grassroots level, whether you're looking at, the small number of executives and people in senior level positions, I think there's a lot to be said there. It can help us. It can literally help us change a narrative.
Yep. 100%. And like you said, it has an endless reach. It can help anybody in, whether it's coaching, playing, small business, anything, essentially. Because like you said, there is nothing really out there. And to have that main hub that then you can branch off and pull from different areas and impact someone's life in whatever industry or sport it is, have that central hub, I think, is going to be big.
Definitely. That's a
Couple questions that I used with Robin yesterday. They're going to recycle as well. We got about 5-10 minutes left, if you're okay with that, since we did start a bit later.
sure.
What advice would you give the next generation of players and coaches that want to get into coaching?
It's all about networking. If I didn't, just from a humble standpoint, I mean, I quite literally, through Facebook, through whatever social medias we were using back in 2012, 2011, I was like, hey, this is my name, this is where I played, and I would love to help. And I just kind of left it at that. And whoever hit me back, fortunately, a number of people were just looking for some assistance. But you have to be willing to step out of your zone and put yourself in that. And I think that's the only way it's going to happen, because otherwise you're confined to who you know and hoping somebody can do a favor for you. But if you just, from a humble standpoint, hey, I would love to get involved. Like, how can I do that? I wanna be like Coach Cheryl one day. I want to coach Team Canada. So I gotta. Hey, how can I get involved? Do I gotta, grab, rebound the ball, and how much more professional development do I need? But I think that's so key. It's so important. I don't think it's gonna get handed to you, because there's so many people who would love to do this, and again, not that many professional positions. And even for us, we ain't doing this because of the money. I can guarantee you that, so, but the passion is there, right? The passion is there. The love for the game is there. The love for the mentorship capability and uplifting our young men and our young women from all backgrounds and all walks of life. I think that's there, but you have to kind of go to the thick of it. And I think, especially as Canadians, like we're always inclined to help. But if we don't know, we don't know. You know what I mean? Like, so I think you have to be able to kind of network in all ways. Send emails, get on LinkedIn, go on Instagram, send those DMs, get in people's DMs, be a go-getter.
I think that's the same, I think, in any industry. Nobody's going to hand it to you. You have to be willing to push yourself outside of your comfort zone, and that's kind of how you grow. You don't really grow much in your own little bubble. You got to step out once in a while, and you said put your name out there. The worst thing that they can say to you is no.
That's what
it's a 2-letter word that shouldn't cause you any physical pain at all. And you take your bumps and you move on to the next one. And someone's gonna, like you said, hit you back and open a door that you never thought that could have been opened. And all of a sudden you're gaining experience. And like you said, you don't do it for the money, you do it for the passion. If you get money for it, great. But you just got to be willing to put yourself out there. I think that's one thing I find with a lot of younger kids these days is they're kind of scared to put themselves out there in a fear of being rejected. But that's how you grow.
But you also see that as a coach, though. It's the kids who, the second you have any kind of feedback that is not necessarily like 100% positive, it's like I'm a victim, right? And so it's like it's like we have to let these kids know it's about going out there, failing, then trying it again, failing, then trying it again.
Yep.
You have to fail in order to succeed. And I don't think some of our kids get that enough. Even people that I grew up with, some of them just didn't get it. It was like, why am I not getting this? Why am I not getting this? It's like, you can't have that mentality, because again, it's not going to help you. And it's definitely not going to help somebody else who's not interested in helping you. So, we have to be a little bit more resilient than that. And so that's part of that. That's, as a coach, I'm always preaching that message. Like, put forth the effort, but don't expect anything, you know?
You get out of it what you put into it, and if you don't put anything into it, then you're gonna be stuck in the same spot you are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We could have touched on it already, but the last one here before we wrap it up is, how do we continue to grow the attention, and just how do we continue to grow the women's game in Canada, whether it's the product itself, the coaches, how do we continue to keep that narrative going all year round?
From a marketing standpoint, or just from keeping kids playing, like
Just
keeping our girls playing?
either, just in general, just to keep the women's game growing and continuing on the progression it has.
Well, I think we just need a lot of programs geared at like giving those girls a platform for either exposure, development, anything that drives attention and reinforces kind of those behaviors that, hey, I want to do this. You know, I have fun doing this. And it's a big ask because, you know, for us as university coaches, we kind of have our team. Some of us are wearing 2-3 different hats. So now what happens is we're asking that to happen at the grassroots level. And to be honest with you, if it doesn't happen at the grassroots level, then those numbers are going to keep dwindling. So it's a big ask because we're tasking the people who probably have full-time jobs, but do this, you know, out of their passion. And so I think, you know, we can only do so much as university coaches. We should do stuff. We should run events annually, you know, like we host like our U14 provincials and take them on university tours and stuff like that. But I really think it's in their peer-to-peer group, like how can they access more, how can they have more fun in playing the sport? And that is going to happen at the grassroots level. So we thank those coaches, but I think we need more of that. We need more of that for sure. And then like you had mentioned, we have to find a way to shed some more light on them from a media and marketing standpoint. You know, you get a nice mix with some music, man. Like, I'm going to want to play basketball, you know, but if I don't see it on my Instagram page, if it's not shown on my local TV channel, I mean, then why would I be interested in doing it?
Yep. It's, again, it's that if you don't see it, then you're not going to want to do it. And it makes it tough to grow a game that when there's limited, even written coverage, TV and whatnot, I could go on for days.
Yes.
Of why it should happen in some capacity. If there's got to be a way to get more people talking about it outside of nationals, and a 30-second highlight clip for the final game, and that's it. There's got to be ways to keep it visible from October 1 to March 8 or 9. That's a 5-month window, 6-month window where there's games all throughout the week. That even it's simple as having a score ticker on TSN and Sportsnet, even if it's the top 10.
Right.
Just that way people actually know it's there. It may drive eyes to league websites, team websites, keeps the conversation going. But when they can't even see scores on your major networks, let alone features until nationals, and then it's 8 teams out of 48, and that's it.
Right. And we just started showing that too. Like, before you had to pay for that. So people were like, hell no, I ain't paying for that. Like, you know what I mean? And now it's like, okay, whoa, people actually want to come and watch this, and people actually want to. So I agree. I mean, I think we're definitely trending upwards.
Yep.
I think from the ground level, there's a lot of players that are seeing more value in it. But yeah, like, you know, what is it going to take to get us on our local TV channels? What's it going to take? That's got to be the focus. Is it private investors? Is it federal? You know, I know there's a lot of federal money geared towards getting women in coaching and enticing more young females to continue in sport. Maybe some of that money needs to go in the actual marketing of the brand, the highest brand at the amateur level, which is us.
Yep.
You know, I really think that would help. I know young women would watch, right?
100%.
But yeah, so that's a really important point that you make, for sure.
Yep. Well, Coach, I want to thank you again for taking the time out of your night to do this. It was a lot of fun. I got a lot of great insight into your story that I didn't know and really see how you have shaped into the coach you are today. So again, thank you very much for doing this, and wish you all the best as the summer unfolds, and hopefully we have a season of some sort this year.
Yeah, fingers
Fingers
crossed.
crossed.
Fingers crossed.
But hopefully we could do this again soon. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tyler. I appreciate you having me, and thanks everybody else for tuning in.